The cameras were rolling. The most powerful man in New York, Alistair Devereux, was about to announce his $10 billion legacy. He placed a proud hand on his pregnant wife's stomach, smiling for the world. But his wife, Serafina, didn't smile back. She stepped to the microphone, her hands shaking, and delivered 3 sentences that didn't just end a marriage, they destroyed an empire. What did she know? And why did the world's most controlled man completely, violently lose his mind? Stay with us as we uncover the lie that brought a king to his knees. The Devereux penthouse on Central Park South was less a home than a mausoleum of modern art. The white marble floors clicked icily under Serafina Ashford Devereux's heels, a lonely sound in the cavernous, glass-walled space. The air was climate-controlled to a precise 68 degrees, not for her comfort or even the comfort of their unborn child, but for the preservation of the Francis Bacon triptych in the foyer and the Gerhard Richter that dominated the living room. It was a coldness that had seeped into her bones over 3 years of marriage, a sterile, museum-like silence, punctuated only by the distant, muted hum of the city 30 floors below, and Alistair's voice, which never seemed to rise above a controlled, boardroom monotone. Serafina was 7 months pregnant. The child, a boy, was already destined for greatness according to Alistair. He was the Devereux heir, a phrase Alistair used with the same proprietary pride as he used for his new Gulfstream G700 or his majority stake in Devereux Holdings. This morning, however, the silence was different. It was heavy, charged. Alistair was in his study, a chamber of polished mahogany and smoked glass, practicing his speech. Today was the most important day of his public life. The launch of the Devereux Legacy Fund, a $10 billion philanthropic pledge that would, in the words of his PR chief, redefine 21st century charity and, not coincidentally, scrub his reputation clean from a recent, brutal corporate takeover. Serafina stood in their bedroom, a room so vast it felt empty, even when full of priceless antiques. She was looking not at her reflection, but at the iPad she held in trembling hands. It was Alistair's personal device, the one he thought was secured by facial recognition and a complex alphanumeric password. But Alistair, a man who could anticipate global market shifts, had made one critical, arrogant mistake. He underestimated his wife. He assumed her background in art history made her a beautiful, simple creature. He forgot that her mind, the mind that could trace the provenance of a lost Caravaggio, was built on an obsession with detail. She hadn't been looking for anything. Not really. She had just been trying to find the restaurant reservation for their anniversary dinner last week, a dinner he had cancelled for a last-minute board call. But she had found something else. A folder, hidden within a decoy finance app, labeled Project Legacy. It wasn't philanthropy. It was a string of encrypted emails with a private clinic in Zurich, Switzerland. It was invoices for procedures Serafina had never heard of. It was genetic sequencing charts. And then the final document, the one that made her physically sick, a comprehensive medical file. It was her medical file. She saw dates and times she had supposedly been at this clinic, but she'd never been to Zurich. She'd been in New York at her regular OB/GYN appointments with Dr. Peterson. Then she cross-referenced the dates. They were the same dates. The blood drained from her face. The prenatal vitamins Dr. Peterson prescribed. The enhanced nutrient IVs. Alistair's private concierge doctor, Dr. Martin Cole, insisted she take weekly for the baby's health. The blood samples they took every single time, citing her high-risk pregnancy, though she was perfectly healthy. It wasn't vitamins. It wasn't standard procedure. The file detailed an experimental, highly illegal gene editing protocol. Subject, S. Devereux. Fetus, A. Devereux de Stone. They weren't just monitoring the baby, they were altering him. The emails from Alistair were terrifyingly precise, demanding elimination of genetic markers for addictive personality and enhancement of cognitive spatial reasoning. But the worst part, the part that stopped her heart, was a single line in an email from Alistair to the clinic's director. The maternal flaws, see Ashford family history, psychological, must be suppressed at all costs. The carrier's health is secondary to the success of the primary subject. The carrier. She wasn't his wife. She wasn't even a mother. She was a vessel, a carrier. Her family history, her mother's depression, her grandfather's struggle with alcohol after the war, were flaws he was suppressing. He was risking her life and the sanctity of their child's to design a perfect heir, a son without the messy, human imperfections of her bloodline. A cold, clarifying rage settled over her. The love she thought she had, or the comfortable, safe affection she had mistaken for love, evaporated, leaving behind the hard, sharp edges of betrayal. Alistair's voice boomed from the doorway. "Seraphina, you're not dressed." She quickly locked the iPad and set it down, her heart hammering against her ribs. He stood there, already in his custom Tom Ford suit, a dark navy pinstripe. Alistair Devereux was a strikingly handsome man, with sharp, patrician features and eyes the color of cold steel. He didn't just enter a room, he occupied it, displacing the air. "The car is downstairs. Gregory is having a meltdown about the Times reporter. I need you on that stage in 20 minutes. He wasn't asking, he was commanding. "Alistair," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I don't feel well. I don't think I can go." His face hardened instantly. The mask of the charming philanthropist fell away, revealing the ruthless CEO beneath. "Don't be ridiculous. You're pregnant, not dying. You are the centerpiece of this announcement. A man, his pregnant wife, his legacy. It's the narrative. You will be there, you will smile, and you will look adoringly at me when I speak about our son. Is that understood?" She looked at him, really looked at him. Perhaps for the first time, she saw the man who called her a carrier. "Yes," Seraphina said, the word tasting like ash. "It's understood. I just need a moment to get ready." 15 minutes. He turned and left, his footsteps echoing on the marble. The moment he was gone, Seraphina walked to her jewelry box. She pulled out her phone, a simple, non-networked burner phone she'd bought for cash 6 months ago, after a flicker of suspicion she'd dismissed as paranoia. She dialed the only number in its contacts. It rang once. "Camilla, it's me. He's gone. I'm on my way." "Yes, I have it. I have all of it. He has no idea. He just called me the centerpiece. He's about to find out exactly what kind of centerpiece I am." She hung up, took a deep, shuddering breath, and walked into her closet. She didn't choose the soft beige maternity dress Alistair had laid out. She chose a dress the color of blood. The grand ballroom at the Pierre Hotel was suffocating. It was a circus of high-stakes media, a fever dream of flashing camera bulbs, booms mics hovering like metallic vultures, and the low, anxious hum of hundreds of people. The air smelled of stale coffee, expensive perfume, and corporate desperation. Gregory Shaw, Alistair's perpetually panicked head of public relations, was buzzing near the entrance, his face pale and slick with sweat, whispering frantically into a headset. "No more questions about the Apex acquisition. This is philanthropy, 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 and I want Sarah Jensen from the Times in the front row. She's the one we need to flip." Seraphina arrived through a private entrance, flanked by 2 of Alistair's personal security team, men she realized were not there to protect her, but to handle her. She felt like a show pony being led to the ring. Her red dress was a stark, defiant slash of color against the ballroom's muted gold and cream decor. She was composed, her face a mask of serene neutrality, but inside, her entire nervous system was screaming. Her hand rested on the slight swell of her stomach, a protective, primal gesture. This was no longer about her. It was about the child she had to save from its own father. Alistair was already on the dais, schmoozing with the mayor and a few select board members. He saw her, and his eyes lit up, not with love, but with approval. The red dress was bold. It would play well on camera. He gestured for her to join him, his smile a brilliant, predatory flash of white. "There she is," he said, his voice amplified by the microphone as he took her hand. The crowd applauded. "My beautiful wife, Serafina. Glowing, isn't she?" He pulled her to his side, his arm a possessive steel band around her waist, his hand splaying possessively over their child. Serafina smiled. It was the best performance of her life. She let him guide her to her seat, a plush velvet chair just behind the imposing mahogany podium bearing the new Devereaux Legacy Fund logo. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press, members of the board, esteemed guests," Alistair began, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. He was a master. He spoke for 20 minutes, weaving a tapestry of compassionate capitalism. He talked about his own humble beginnings, a complete fabrication. His father had left him $500 million, and his profound, newly discovered need to give back. "Legacy isn't about the buildings we put our names on," he said, his eyes scanning the front row, locking with Sarah Jensen's. "It's not about the bottom line or the Q4 earnings. It's about the future. It's about the world we leave for our children." As if on cue, he turned and gestured to Serafina. "When I learned I was going to be a father, when my brilliant, wonderful wife Serafina told me we were bringing a son into this world, everything changed." Serafina felt the cameras swing to her. She kept the smile plastered on her face, a brittle, fragile thing. "This $10 billion fund," Alistair continued, his voice thick with performative emotion, "is not just my legacy. It is his. It is a promise to my unborn son that the Devereaux name will stand not just for power, but for progress, for health, for a better, stronger future." The room erupted in applause. Alistair basked in it, raising his hands. He looked invincible, a modern-day king bestowing his grace upon the masses. Gregory Shaw was practically weeping with relief off stage. "And now," Alistair said, turning to her, his eyes shining with triumph, "I want to invite the woman who made all this possible, the love of my life and the mother of my heir, Serafina, to say a few words." He stepped back, gesturing for her to take the podium. This was part of the plan. She was supposed to read a short, pre-written speech from a note card, thanking him for his generosity and vision. Gregory Shaw had written it himself. Serafina stood. The ballroom fell silent. The hundreds of cameras refocused, their lenses like a firing squad. She felt a bead of sweat trace its way down her spine. She walked the few steps to the podium, the clicking of her heels the only sound. Alistair gave her a supportive wink, a grotesque parody of a loving husband. She reached the microphone. She looked out at the sea of expectant faces. She saw Sarah Jensen, pen poised. She saw the TV cameras with their glowing red live lights. She saw Alistair, smiling, radiant in his arrogance. And then she saw Camilla Rodriguez, her friend, and, as of this morning, her lead counsel, standing quietly at the back of the room, next to the main exit. Camilla gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. Serafina took a deep breath. She looked down at the note cards Gregory Shaw had given her, the saccharine, empty words blurring before her eyes, With a flick of her wrist, she slid the note cards off the podium. They fluttered silently to the floor. A nervous cough rippled through the press corps. Beside her, Alistair's smile tightened by a fraction. "My wife, a believer in speaking from the heart," he ad-libbed, a hint of steel in his voice. Serafina leaned into the microphone. Her voice was low, clear, and carried to every corner of the room. "Thank you, Alistair," she began, her eyes locking onto his. "You've always been a master of public perception, a true artist of the narrative." Alistair's smile vanished. This was not the script. "You stand here today and speak of legacy," Serafina continued, her voice gaining strength. "You speak of children and you speak of the future. But the one thing you are truly an expert in is fraud." The silence in the ballroom was no longer respectful. It was a vacuum, sharp and absolute, sucking all the air from the room. Hundreds of people held their breath simultaneously. Gregory Shaw, in the wings, looked like he'd been shot. He lunged for the soundboard, whispering, "Cut the mic! Cut it!" But the tech, frozen in disbelief, just stared at the stage. Alistair's face, a moment ago so full of benevolent charm, had frozen. "Serafina!" he hissed, stepping toward her, his smile a grotesque, painted-on grimace. "What do you think you're doing? She's just a little overwhelmed." He laughed, a short barking sound. "The pregnancy hormones, you know." He reached for her arm. Serafina snatched it away as if he were on fire. "Do not touch me," she commanded, her voice amplified into a deafening boom. "And do not dare speak of my pregnancy." The cameras were no longer just flashing. They were a solid, blinding wall of light. The rapid clack, clack, clack of keyboards was the only sound. Sarah Jensen of the Times was typing so fast it looked like her fingers were blurring. "You're right about one thing, Alistair," Serafina said, turning back to the microphone, her gaze sweeping over the stunned audience. "This is about legacy, and it is about our child. Which is why I am announcing today, in front of God and all of you, that I am filing for divorce, effective immediately." A collective gasp, a roar of shouted questions erupted. "Mrs. Devereux, what is she saying? Alistair, is this true?" Alistair's mask didn't just crack, it shattered. "Shut this down," he roared, not at Serafina, but at his staff. "Get her off the stage. She's unwell. She's having a breakdown." Two security guards started to move, but Serafina's voice stopped them cold. "If you take one more step, you will be named as accessories in the criminal complaint." The guards froze. All eyes snapped back to her. "Criminal complaint? Serafina, you are making the biggest mistake of your life," Alistair seethed, his voice a low, venomous promise, dangerously close to the live microphone. "You will leave this building with nothing. You will be destroyed." "You want to talk about destruction, Alistair?" She shot back, her voice ringing with cold fury. "Let's talk about Project Legacy. Let's talk about the Zurich Institute for Genetic Purity. Does that sound like philanthropy to any of you?" A new, more confused murmur went through the crowd. Sarah Jensen's head snapped up. She knew the name. She'd heard rumors of that clinic, whispers of eugenics and designer babies for the ultra-rich, but had never found a source. Alistair went white. He knew that name. He knew she could not possibly know that name. He lunged for the microphone bank, trying to physically rip it from the podium. "She's lying. She is profoundly ill. Someone call her doctor." "Oh, I'll be calling my doctors, Alistair," Serafina said, shrinking back from his lunge, her hand protectively on her stomach. "I'll be calling all of them, especially Dr. Martin Cole, the man who has been injecting me with experimental, non-FDA-approved genetic sequencing drugs for the last 4 months under the guise of Prenatal vitamins. The room exploded. This was no longer a domestic dispute. This was a horror story. "She's insane!" Alistair yelled, his voice cracking, his polished composure completely gone. He was frantic, his eyes darting around, looking for an escape, for someone to fix this. She's been poisoned against me. By Marcus Thorne." It was a fatal mistake. Naming his biggest business rival, Marcus Thorne, in this context was a tactical blunder of catastrophic proportions. It instantly gave credibility to the idea that there was something to be poisoned against. "Mr. Devereux," shouted a reporter from the Wall Street Journal, "are you accusing Marcus Thorne of conspiring with your wife? What is your relationship with the Zurich clinic?" "What drugs, Mrs. Devereux?" yelled another. "What did he do to the baby?" "He didn't do it to the baby," Serafina's voice cut through the chaos, clear as a bell. "He did it for himself." She held up a single sheet of paper. The flashes illuminated it. It was the first page of the file, the one with the header, Project Legacy, A. Devereux Textur, and the subheader, Maternal Flaw Suppression Protocol. "My husband is not a philanthropist. He is a monster," she stated, her voice shaking but full of conviction. "He is obsessed with his own DNA. He is so terrified that his son might inherit his own father's alcoholism, or my mother's depression, so terrified of a human child, that he has been using me and our unborn baby as his personal science experiment." She looked directly at Alistair, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You're not launching a legacy, Alistair. You're launching a master race. Starting with a son you tried to build like one of your skyscrapers, cold, perfect, and completely inhuman." Alistair stared at the paper in her hand. His face was no longer pale. It was a dark, mottled red. His chest was heaving, his billion-dollar suit suddenly looking like a straitjacket. He was trapped, illuminated by 1,000 lights, his deepest, darkest secret laid bare for the world. "You," he whispered, the word a rasp. "You bitch." He didn't lunge for the paper. He lunged for her. The attack was clumsy, a blind surge of pure aristocratic rage. Alistair Devereux, the man who dined with presidents and moved markets with a whisper, lunged at his pregnant wife in front of the world's media. He never reached her. Two figures intercepted him simultaneously. The first was his own security guard, finally snapping into action, grabbing his boss by the biceps. The second, shockingly, was Camila Rodriguez, who had sprinted from the back of the room, moving with the speed of a linebacker. She put herself directly between Alistair and Serafina, her arm outstretched. "Don't you touch her!" Camilla yelled, her voice raw. "Get her out of here!" Alistair bellowed, struggling against his own security. "Get them both out! This is a private matter!" "It stopped being a private matter," Camilla shouted back, pulling a small USB drive from her pocket, "when you committed multiple felonies, Mr. Devereux, including aggravated assault with a medical proxy and severe violations of federal human experimentation laws." The room was utter pandemonium. Reporters were standing on chairs, screaming questions. "What's on the drive? Who is she? Is that your lawyer?" "She's nobody," Alistair roared, his face contorted. He finally ripped free from his guard's grasp, but he was too late. Camilla had already tossed the USB drive to the front row. "Sarah Jensen, New York Times. That's the full file. The encrypted emails, the wire transfers to the Zurich clinic, and Dr. Cole's signature on the procurement forms for the illegal compounds. It's all there." Sarah Jensen caught the drive like it was a holy relic. She was already elbowing her way out of the ballroom, screaming at her editor on the phone. Alistair watched the drive disappear. He watched his life's work, his reputation, his entire meticulously crafted world walk out the door in the hands of the one reporter he could never control. This was the moment he truly lost control. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a complete psychological disintegration. His mind, built on the infallible foundation of his own superiority, couldn't process this level of defeat. He, Alistair Devereux, had been outmaneuvered by her. "You think you've won?" he screamed, his voice pitching high and frantic. He wasn't talking to the press anymore. He was talking only to Serafina, who stood, protected by Camilla, watching him unravel. "You think you can take my son? You think you can walk away with my legacy?" He pointed a shaking finger at her stomach. "That is a Devereux. That is my blood. I built him, I perfected him. You are just the carrier," Serafina supplied, her voice quiet but amplified by the microphone she still stood before. That one word broke him. "I will sue you," he shrieked, his fists clenched at his sides. "I will take you to court. I will prove you are an unfit mother. I will prove you conspired with Thorn. I will. He was hyperventilating, his eyes wide and unseeing. "You'll what, Alistair?" Serafina asked, her voice dangerously calm. "You'll tell the judge you've been illegally experimenting on him. You'll tell the world you violated my body and his? What judge do you think will grant you custody?" "He's mine." It was a primal scream, a sound that came from the very depths of his ego. "He's not," Serafina said. It was so quiet, so simple, that the room, which had been a wall of noise, fell instantly silent again. Even Alistair paused his tirade, his mouth half open. "What?" he whispered. Serafina took a step forward, back to the podium. She looked at her husband, the man she once, briefly, thought she might love. The man who had just tried to assault her. "This is the part you never understood, Alistair," she said, her voice full of a sudden, profound sadness that was more cutting than her anger. "This is the twist you were too arrogant to see." She placed her hand on her stomach. "You were so obsessed with your bloodline, so obsessed with your own DNA, with passing on your superior genes and erasing my flaws. You spent millions, you broke dozens of laws, you violated my body, all to ensure the Devereux heir was perfect." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "But you were too late, Alistair." She looked up, her eyes clear and unblinking, and delivered the killing blow. "The child I am carrying isn't yours." The silence that followed was not a vacuum. It was a physical weight, a dense, heavy thing that pressed down on every person in the room. Alistair Devereux froze, his body rigid, his arms still outstretched. The mottled red drained from his face, leaving a sickly, waxy pallor. His lips parted, but no sound emerged. He looked like a statue, a monument to his own spectacular ruin. The press was equally stunned. This was impossible. The story was already the biggest scandal of the decade. But this was a Greek tragedy. "What?" a reporter in the front row finally whispered, the word barely audible. "It's true," Serafina said, her voice resonating with the terrible calm finality of an executioner. She didn't look at the press. She looked only at Alistair, forcing him to see the truth in her eyes. "You remember before we were married, Alistair? You insisted on a prenuptial agreement. You insisted on a full medical workup. You were so thorough." He was still frozen, his mind clearly struggling to catch up with the reality that was crashing down upon him. "But I was thorough too," Serafina continued. "I had my own concerns. You spoke so often about your legacy, your blood." I worried. What if I couldn't perform? What if I couldn't provide the heir you so clearly demanded? She took a breath. "So I went to a fertility clinic. My own clinic. Not one of yours. Not one run by monsters. Just a simple, anonymous clinic. And I had tests done. All of them. She motioned to Camilla, who was now holding a new, thick manila envelope. Camilla didn't toss this one. She walked slowly, deliberately, to the podium and handed it to Serafina. "It turned out I was perfectly healthy," Serafina said. "But the doctors, they suggested that if I was worried about the pressure of conception, I should consider options, safeguards, for my own peace of mind." Alistair's eyes, wide and terrified, flicked to the envelope. He knew. In that instant, he knew. "You were so obsessed with your own genetic condition, the one you were hiding from me, the one you were trying to edit out of my son, that you never once considered a much simpler problem," Serafina said. She pulled the top sheet from the envelope. It was a lab report. "The condition you've been spending tens of millions to hide, Alistair, the one you were terrified of passing on, it doesn't just affect personality, does it? It affects everything. The clinic in Zurich, the one you paid to perfect your heir, was just taking your money. They were never going to succeed." She held up the report. "Your sperm count is 0, Alistair. It has been for at least a decade. You are, and have always been, completely sterile." The sound Alistair made was not human. It was a low, guttural, tearing sound, the sound of a man's entire identity being ripped from his body. "No," he whispered. "No, that's a lie. That's a forgery. That's Thorne's work. She's lying." "Am I?" Serafina said. "I went to a sperm bank, Alistair, an anonymous donor, a healthy man, a good man, according to his file, a teacher, someone who wanted to help a family, not build an empire." She placed her hand back on her stomach. "The son I am carrying is mine, but he has absolutely no connection to you, not by blood and certainly not by love. You have been building a legacy on a foundation that doesn't even exist." The implications hit the room like a shock wave. The Devereux heir wasn't a Devereux. The legacy fund was for a child that wasn't his. The illegal experiments were performed on a fetus that didn't even carry the genes he was trying to perfect. He had destroyed his company, his reputation, and his wife's health for a child that was, to him, a complete stranger. It was an irony so profound, so devastating, it was almost poetic. Gregory Shaw had collapsed in the wings. A medic was being called. Alistair Devereux simply stared at his wife's stomach, the focus of all his ambition. His face, which had cycled through charm, rage, and panic, was now utterly, terrifyingly blank. The lights were on, but no one was home. He had been so thoroughly, completely beaten that his mind had simply shut down. He looked at Serafina, his eyes empty. "My son," he whispered, one last time, a question. "No," Serafina said firmly. "My son, and you will never come near him." The dam of journalistic professionalism finally broke. It was a frenzy, a stampede. Reporters surged towards the stage, security guards forming a protective wall around Serafina and Camilla. Microphones were thrust forward. "Mrs. Devereux, who is the father? Alistair, is it true? Are you sterile? What will happen to Devereux Holdings? Are you pressing charges?" Alistair didn't hear any of it. He turned, slowly, like a man in a dream. He walked past his board members, who shrank away from him as if he were diseased. He walked past the chaos, past the screaming, past the wreckage of his life. He reached the edge of the dais, his movements stiff and robotic. And then his legs just gave out. He didn't faint. He crumpled. He collapsed onto the steps of the stage, his Tom Ford suit pooling around him, and stared blankly at the plush carpet, his hands limp at his sides. The great Alistair Devereux, the King of New York, the master of the universe, was broken. He hadn't just lost control. He had lost reality. Camilla put her arm around Serafina. "It's done," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Let's get you out of here." As security and Camilla escorted Serafina through the side exit, the last thing she saw was her husband, the man who wanted to build a perfect son, sitting catatonic on the floor, 1,000 cameras flashing in his empty eyes. The fallout was not a storm, it was an extinction-level event. Before Serafina and Camilla had even reached the black SUV waiting in the hotel's service alley, the New York Times website had a breaking banner. Devereaux heir a fraud. Wife alleges illegal genetic experimentation in explosive press conference. Husband Alistair Devereaux collapses. By the time they hit the FDR Drive, the stock for Devereaux Holdings, which Alistair had tied inextricably to his personal brand, had been halted by the Nasdaq. When it reopened an hour later, it didn't just drop. It evaporated. Billions in market value vanished in seconds. The story was a perfect, toxic cocktail of elements the media and the public couldn't resist. A billionaire's hubris, a scorned wife's revenge, a secret love child, and the terrifying, futuristic horror of designer babies and eugenics. Alistair was filmed being led from the Pierre, not in handcuffs, but in a way that was almost worse. He was flanked by paramedics, his face still vacant, his movements sluggish. He was transported, according to a source, to the private psychiatric wing of New York Presbyterian, under a 72-hour hold for extreme psychological distress. The king was in a padded room. The collateral damage spread instantly. Dr. Martin Cole was arrested at his Park Avenue practice within 3 hours, his records seized by the FBI. The Zurich clinic was raided by Swiss authorities, acting on an international tip from the FDA and Interpol. The Devereaux Holdings Board of Directors convened an emergency meeting and, in a unanimous vote that took less than 10 minutes, suspended Alistair Devereaux indefinitely as CEO and chairman, citing the morality clause in his own contract. And Marcus Thorne, the rival Alistair had so foolishly named. He was on television by 5 p.m., his face a mask of solemn concern. "This is a tragedy for the Devereaux family," he said, "but it is a greater tragedy for the market. It reveals a deep instability at the core of the company. My own firm, Thorne Capital, is, of course, prepared to step in and stabilize Devereaux Holdings, should the board require new leadership to protect shareholder interests." It was a bloodless coup, and Alistair had handed him the knife. But for Serafina, the victory was hollow. She wasn't celebrating. She was in a safe house, a nondescript brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, owned by Camilla's law firm. She spent the night not watching the news, but on the phone with a team of perinatologists, the best in the country, who were analyzing the files from the USB drive. "The compounds are aggressive," the lead doctor, a woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, told her over the phone, her voice grave. "They're designed to permeate the placental barrier. We've never seen anything like this used on a human subject. We need to get you in, immediately. We need to know what he did to you, and to the baby." The rage returned, colder this time. Alistair's final, unknowing act of cruelty was this. He had performed his monstrous experiments on a child that wasn't even his, potentially harming an innocent baby. And its mother. For nothing. The child of a school teacher from Ohio, a man who just wanted to help, was now carrying the toxic burden of Alistair Devereaux's ego. The next few days were a blur of medical tests, legal depositions, and quiet, terrified waiting. Serafina sat in sterile rooms, technicians and doctors drawing her blood, running ultrasounds, their faces carefully neutral. "The good news," Dr. Sharma finally told her, after 48 hours of agonizing uncertainty, is that the baby's core development looks normal. The compounds Dr. Cole was using were, for lack of a better word, experimental. But they were also, thank God, largely ineffective. It seems Alistair was being scammed by the Zurich clinic as much as he was trying to scam genetics. Serafina broke down, the sobs of relief racking her entire body. The baby was safe. Her baby was safe. But Serafina, Dr. Sharma said gently, we need to talk about you. Your blood work is concerning. The vitamin cocktail was not inert. It's put incredible strain on your kidneys and your liver. You are a high-risk pregnancy now, not because of your genetics, but because of what he did. We need to monitor you constantly. The fight wasn't over. It had just entered a new, more terrifying phase. Meanwhile, Alistair's 72-hour hold expired. But he didn't leave the hospital. His lawyers, the best and most ruthless firm in the city, had seen the writing on the wall. The SEC was indicting him. The FDA was indicting him. The Southern District of New York was indicting him. And that was all before Serafina's own civil suit. A criminal trial was unavoidable. But a man in a prison jumpsuit is a criminal. A man in a hospital gown is a patient. On the fifth day, Alistair's legal team filed a motion. Alistair Devereux was not fit to stand trial. He was, they claimed, suffering from a complete psychotic break, a man undone by the stress of his work and the betrayal of his wife. They painted Serafina as a calculating, monstrous gold digger who had faked a pregnancy with a donor, lied to her husband, and conspired with his rival to steal his company, a plot so cruel it had shattered his mind. "They're going to try and paint you as the villain," Camilla said, her face grim as she read the legal filing. "They'll say you drove him insane." "Let them," Serafina said, her hand on her stomach. She was sitting in the window of the brownstone, watching the rain fall. "He's the man behind the mask, Camilla. He showed the whole world who he was when he lunged at me. He showed them who he was when he screamed that I was a carrier. It doesn't matter what they say now. Everyone saw his real face. His lawyers are petitioning to have him moved to a private long-term care facility in Connecticut. Not a prison, not a state hospital, a country club with doctors." "It's still a cage," Serafina said, "and he built it himself." She knew, with chilling certainty, that Alistair wasn't faking his breakdown. A man like Alistair could survive prison. He could survive financial ruin. He could even survive public humiliation. But the one thing he could not survive, the one thing that could truly, fundamentally break him, was the knowledge that he was sterile, that his bloodline, the only thing he ever truly valued, ended with him. He had been rendered in his own mind completely and utterly pointless. The man behind the mask wasn't a king. He was just a terrified, empty shell, and Serafina had been the one to hold the mirror up to him. The winter that followed was brutal, but Serafina was safe. She had won her divorce settlement in a quiet, out-of-court proceeding. Alistair's lawyers, seeing the mountain of evidence against them and their client's non-responsive state, had folded. They hadn't fought for his assets. They had fought for his freedom, trading his fortune for an agreement from Serafina not to pursue additional criminal charges beyond what the state was already doing. She didn't take the penthouse. She didn't take the art. She didn't take a dime of Devereux Holdings' money. She took a single, lump sum payment, enough to ensure her child's future and her own, and walked away. She wanted nothing that carried his name. Alistair Devereux was never seen in public again. He was quietly moved to the private long-term care facility in Connecticut, a place called Silver Hill, where he would live out his days, attended by orderlies, staring at the manicured lawns. The great man of industry was gone, a ghost haunting his own empty legacy. Devereux Holdings was carved up and sold for parts, most of it absorbed by Marcus Thorne's company for pennies on the dollar. The Devereux name was removed from every building, every fund, every charity. Within a year, it was as if he had never existed. Spring came, and with it, new life. 2 months after the press conference, in a quiet, private room at the real New York Presbyterian, surrounded by Dr. Sharma and a team of specialists, Serafina gave birth to a healthy, screaming baby boy. He was beautiful. He was small, with a tuft of dark hair and a temper. And when he opened his eyes, they were a warm, clear brown. Not the cold steel of Alistair Devereux. Serafina named him Arthur. A simple, strong name. No middle name. No O2. Just Arthur Ashford. She moved out of the city. She bought a rambling, historic farmhouse in the Hudson Valley, a place with old trees and a wide porch. The sterile, cold silence of the penthouse was replaced by the sound of wind chimes, bird song, and soon a baby's laughter. Her life was no longer about galas or art auctions or maintaining an image. It was about 2 a.m. feedings and muddy walks and discovering the simple, profound joy of watching her son learn to grasp her finger. One afternoon, 6 months later, she was sitting on a blanket in her yard, Arthur asleep on her chest. Camilla drove up, a bottle of wine in her hand. "Well," Camilla said, settling onto the blanket and pouring 2 glasses. "It's official. The SDNY just closed their case. Alistair has been declared permanently mentally incompetent. He'll never see the inside of a courtroom or the outside of Silver Hill." Serafina nodded, gently rubbing her son's back. "It's done then. Really done." "It's done." Camilla took a sip of wine. "Was it worth it, Serafina? The terror, the scandal, all of it?" Serafina looked down at Arthur. She thought of the life he would have had. A life of cold precision, of being molded and edited, of being owned by a man who saw him as a product. A life of perpetual pressure to be the Devereux heir. Then she looked at the life he had now. A life where he would be free to be human. Free to have flaws. Free to be happy. Free to be loved for who he was, not what he was made of. "You know," Serafina said, her voice soft, "Alistair was right about one thing. It was about legacy." She kissed the top of her son's head, breathing in the smell of baby powder and sunshine. "This is mine." She was no longer the billionaire's wife. She was just Serafina. And for the first time in her life, she was completely, wonderfully free. 4 years passed. The name Devereux was a scar on the face of New York finance, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms, but no longer a headline. Alistair himself had faded from a man into a legal designation, permanently incompetent ward of the state. He resided at Silver Hill, but his mind resided elsewhere, in a fractured past no one could reach. He was, for all intents and purposes, gone. Serafina's life, in contrast, had bloomed. The farmhouse in the Hudson Valley was a true home, filled with the scent of baking bread, old wood, and the chaotic, wonderful clutter of a small child. Arthur Ashford was her entire world. He was a bright, laughing boy, with his donor father's warm brown eyes and a smile that lit up every room. He had Serafina's own curiosity, her love for stories and pictures. She had successfully built a fortress of normalcy around him, a life defined by muddy boots, finger painting, and trips to the local farmer's market, not by the cold, marble-floored prison of his conception. The trauma of those last months in New York had receded. The constant medical checkups for them both had, over time, yielded positive results. Arthur was exceptionally healthy. Serafina's own health, while requiring monitoring, had stabilized. Dr. Sharma had declared them both, cautiously, in the clear. The largely ineffective cocktail of drugs, it seemed, had been a failed, monstrous experiment that left no lasting mark. Serafina had allowed herself, finally, to believe it, until the day of the blocks. Arthur was 3, almost 4. Serafina was in the kitchen, half watching him play in the living room while she prepped dinner. He was quiet, as he often was when he was concentrating. He was using a simple, old-fashioned set of wooden blocks. She smiled, hearing the soft click, click, click of the wood. "Mama, look," he said. Serafina turned, wiping her hands on her apron. "What is it, sweet?" She stopped dead in the doorway. Her heart gave a single, painful jolt. He hadn't built a tower. He hadn't built a castle. On her antique rug, Arthur had constructed an elaborate, cantilevered bridge. It was perfectly balanced, using counterweights and trusses in a way that seemed to defy gravity. It was complex, elegant, and structurally ingenious. It was something a first-year engineering student would have struggled to design. A 3-year-old had built it from a box of 60 wooden blocks. It's beautiful, Arthur," she managed to say, her voice tight. "How did you do that?" Arthur didn't look up, already nudging a triangular block into a new position to extend the span. "The center of gravity was wrong," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "It needed a dual truss support to manage the load. It's simple." "It's simple." A cold sweat broke out on Serafina's neck. She backed away, her hand finding the wall for support. It was just a bright boy. He was a gifted child. That's all it was. It wasn't that. That night she called Camilla, for the first time in months. "He built a bridge, Cam," she whispered, locked in her bathroom, the water running. "A bridge that... it wasn't normal." "Serafina," Camilla said, her voice patient but firm. "He's a smart kid. You're a smart woman. He's allowed to be smart. You cannot let what that bastard did poison your joy. You can't spend your life looking for Alistair's ghost in your son's toy box. He's gone. You won. Remember that." Serafina took a deep breath. Camilla was right. She was being paranoid. It was the anniversary of the press conference, and it was making her jumpy. She was projecting her fears. She hung up, splashed cold water on her face, and went to read Arthur his bedtime story. She would forget it. She managed to for 2 whole weeks. The following Saturday was warm, a perfect autumn day. She took Arthur to the local town park. He was laughing, chasing a yellow leaf as it skittered across the grass. He was her boy, just a normal, happy boy. He ran for the playset, a large wooden structure with a climbing wall and a high-set slide. "Be careful, sweetie," she called, setting her coffee on a bench. "I am always careful, Mama," he called back, his voice bright. She watched him scramble up the ladder. He was agile, confident. He reached the top platform, turned to wave at her, and in that split second, he misjudged his footing. He tripped over the edge of the slide entrance and fell. It was not a small tumble. He fell 6 feet, landing hard on the packed dirt and wood chips below. He landed directly on his left arm. Serafina screamed. The sound was ripped from her throat. Her coffee cup went flying as she sprinted toward him, her mind flashing with images of hospitals, of blood, of everything she had fought to protect being shattered. "Arthur! Oh my God, Arthur! Baby!" She reached him in seconds, her heart exploding with terror. He was on the ground, pushing himself up. His left arm was wrong. It was hanging at an angle that made her physically ill. It was a clear, obvious break. She fell to her knees, hysterical, tears already blinding her. "It's okay, baby. Mama's here. It's okay. We're going to—" She stopped. Arthur was looking at her. His face was pale, but he was not crying. He was not screaming. There were no tears. He was looking at her, his brow furrowed, not in pain, but in confusion. "Arthur?" she whispered, her panic freezing into a new, far more terrible dread. He looked down at his arm, the one dangling at a grotesque angle. He seemed to study it with a kind of detached curiosity. "Mama," he said, his voice perfectly level, completely calm. "You are having an inefficient emotional response. Your vocalizations are not helpful. My humerus is fractured. We need to go to the hospital to get it set." Serafina's blood ran cold. She stared at her son, her 4-year-old son, who was clinically diagnosing his own severe injury without a single tear. Doesn't it hurt?" she choked out. Arthur tilted his head, as if she'd asked a peculiar question. "The nerve endings are sending strong pain signals to my brain." "Yes," he said, as if describing the weather. "But it is not a productive sensation. It is simply data. Can we go now? The risk of a compound fracture will increase with movement." He stood up, cradling his broken arm with his good one, and started to walk calmly toward the parking lot, leaving his mother kneeling in the dirt, staring after him in absolute horror. The doctor at the hospital was amazed. "I've never seen anything like it," the ER doctor told Serafina, who was sitting in the waiting room, shaking so hard she could barely hold the clipboard. "He's the toughest kid in the world. He just sat there while we set the bone. Didn't flinch, just watched. You've got a little stoic on your hands." Serafina just nodded, her stomach a knot of ice. She knew what Alistair had put in those files. Enhancement of cognitive spatial reasoning. That was the bridge, but there was the other part, the part she had focused on less. Suppression of maternal flaws. Her flaws, her mother's depression, her grandfather's weakness, her family's capacity for overwhelming emotion, for art, for passion, for pain. Dr. Sharma had been wrong. The experiment wasn't largely ineffective. It had been catastrophically, terrifyingly precise. Alistair had failed to build a genetic heir, but he had succeeded in something far more monstrous. He had put his mark on her child. She walked back into the exam room. Arthur was sitting on the table, his arm in a bright blue cast. He was swinging his legs, humming a tune from a cartoon. He looked normal. He smiled when he saw her. "Hello, Mama. They said I did well." Serafina's heart broke. She had saved her son from his father, but she hadn't saved him from his father's legacy. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. Alistair was in a padded room, but his ghost was here, in the room, looking at her through her own son's eyes, and she had no idea how to fight it. A story of incredible deceit and a mother's unbelievable courage. Serafina Devereux walked into that press conference as a billionaire's wife, a centerpiece for his ego. She walked out as a free woman and a protector for her unborn son. She proved that the most dangerous secrets are the ones hidden behind a perfect public image, and that sometimes the only way to escape a gilded cage is to burn it to the ground. What did you think of Serafina's incredible final move? Was Alistair's fate deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This story took a lot of research to piece together, and if you enjoyed it, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this video with someone who loves a story of justice, and most importantly, click subscribe and ring that bell. You won't want to miss the next story we uncover.